She was fired and publicly shamed. Days later, the company begged her to return. I still remember the sound. Not the shouting. Not the insults. The silence. A deadly silence filled the boardroom as my termination letter slid across the glass table toward me. 20 people sat there, executives, managers, HR, legal, all dressed in expensive suits. All pretending this was just business. My name is Nia Kamanzi, and in that moment, my career was being buried alive. Miss Kamanzi, the CEO said, adjusting his cufflinks, your services are no longer required. No warning. No discussion.
No dignity. Just like that.
I looked around the room, searching for one familiar face, someone who would speak up, someone who knew the truth. No one met my eyes. The projector behind them still displayed the presentation I had prepared the night before. My ideas, my data, my strategy. They were firing me, using my work. Is there a reason? I asked calmly, though my chest felt like it was on fire. The HR manager cleared her throat. There have been allegations. That word. Allegations. A file was opened. Photos appeared on the screen. Cropped emails. Half-truths. Then came the sentence that changed everything. We believe you attempted to sabotage the company for personal gain. The room gasped. My breath caught. Sabotage? I stood up. That is a lie. I built this project from the ground up. You know that. The CEO leaned back. Nia, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Harder? A man I had trained stood up and said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was always too ambitious. We warned you. Another added, some women don't know their place. That was when the humiliation became public. Security was called. Yes, security. As if I were a criminal. They escorted me out of the boardroom, past glass walls where junior staff stared in shock. Phones came out. Whispers spread. By lunchtime, my firing was already circulating on internal emails. By evening, it was on social media. Senior analyst fired for corporate sabotage. Trusted employee betrays company. My name was everywhere. My reputation, destroyed in hours. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages, accusations. One message hit hardest. From my mother. My daughter, what have you done? I dropped the phone. I had given that company 9 years of my life. Late nights. Missed weddings.
No weekends.
No children.
No excuses.
And this was my reward. But here's what they didn't know. I hadn't just worked there. I had built the system they depended on. And the truth they buried with my firing? It had teeth. The next morning, the company held a press briefing. They used my name again. They called me a lesson. They laughed. But while they were celebrating my fall, I was quietly remembering everything. Every shortcut they took. Every illegal contract. Every file only I had access to. They thought I was finished. They had no idea. They had just fired the one person who knew how to bring them down. And when the truth surfaced, they wouldn't just regret firing me. They would beg. The day after she was fired, the world did not end. That realization hurt more than the humiliation itself. The sun rose as usual. Traffic flooded the streets of Lagos. People rushed to offices, markets, and meetings, chasing dreams that refused to wait for broken hearts. But for Zainab Adeyemi, time had stopped. She sat alone in her small apartment, still wearing yesterday's pain like a second skin. The termination letter lay folded on the table, its sharp words burned into her memory.
Gross misconduct.
Public apology required. They hadn't just taken her job. They had taken her dignity. Her phone buzzed. A message from the company's official group chat appeared, the one she had been removed from just hours earlier. Someone had forgotten to delete her before posting. Let this be a lesson to everyone. No one is bigger than the company. Zainab stared at the screen, then calmly turned the phone face down. For the first time since the public shaming, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something inside her had finally gone quiet.
No anger.
No fear. No need to explain herself. Just silence. That silence followed her for days. She stopped answering calls, stopped defending her name. When former colleagues whispered about her betrayal, she did nothing. When blogs picked up the story and twisted it into a narrative of arrogance and disobedience, she stayed offline. People mistook her silence for defeat. They were wrong. What no one knew was that Zainab had spent 7 years building more than spreadsheets and presentations. She had built systems. She had designed processes. She had created frameworks so complex that even the senior executives relied on her without realizing it. And now she was gone. On the third day after her firing, the cracks began to show. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the operations floor froze. Reports stopped generating. A key client dashboard returned error messages. Junior analysts scrambled, refreshing screens, blaming the internet. By noon, a multi-million naira proposal failed to submit before a deadline. Panic whispered through the office halls. "Where's the backup protocol?" someone asked. No one answered. By evening, the CFO called an emergency meeting. They sat around the long glass table, men in tailored suits, women with tablets and worried eyes. The CEO tapped his pen impatiently. "This never happened before," he said. Someone cleared their throat. "Well, Zainab handled that integration." The room went quiet. Another executive spoke slowly. "She also maintained the client escalation workflow." A third added, "And the automation scripts." Silence returned, heavier this time. Meanwhile, Zainab was somewhere else entirely. She sat in a quiet co-working space across town, a laptop open before her, fingers steady. She wasn't job hunting. She wasn't begging for mercy.
She was documenting.
Every system she had built, every process she had designed, every improvement she had suggested and been ignored for. She didn't rush, because revenge tastes best when served cold and legally. On the 5th day, her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then again.
And again.
Finally, she answered. "Zainab." A familiar voice said, "Too friendly, too fast." "It's me. From HR." She waited. "We were hoping you could help us clarify a few things. Just temporary. Paid, of course." Zainab smiled. "I no longer work for your company," she replied calmly.
A pause.
"Yes, but I wish you the best," she said and ended the call. That night, the company lost its biggest client. The client didn't shout, didn't threaten. They simply sent an email. "Due to repeated operational failures, we are terminating our partnership." Panic turned into chaos. Executives stayed late. Emergency consultants were hired. Nothing worked because the system wasn't broken. The system was missing its architect. On the 7th day, Zainab received a message that made her pause. Not from HR. From the CEO himself. "We need to talk." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back one word. "Tomorrow." That night, she stood by her window, looking at the city lights. For the first time since the public shaming, she allowed herself to feel it. The pain, the injustice, the quiet strength she had discovered in herself. They had fired her publicly to break her. Instead, they had exposed how powerful she truly was. And tomorrow, they would begin to beg. By the 3rd week after she was fired, the company thought Aisha Mensa was finished. That was their first mistake. Inside the glass towers of Corbani Group, her name had become a warning. Managers used her story to scare employees into silence. "Remember what happened to Aisha," they would say.
Dear job.
Don't challenge authority.
They believed she had gone home to cry.
They believed shame had broken her. They were wrong. Aisha had not been sleeping much. Not because of pain, but because her mind was working faster than ever. Every night, she replayed meetings, contracts, emails, decisions she had once questioned but been forced to approve. Patterns began to form. And then a truth surfaced. The corruption wasn't random. It was organized. She sat at her small dining table, laptop open, notebooks spread out. The same table where she had once cried after losing her job was now covered with evidence. Vendor contracts with inflated figures, invoices approved without delivery, emails quietly deleted from company servers. And one name appeared again and again. Daniel Kobia, the same executive who had publicly humiliated her. The same man who smiled while firing her. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. They didn't fire me because I was weak, she whispered to herself. They fired me because I knew too much. That realization changed everything. The next morning, Aisha dressed differently. Not like a disgraced employee, but like a woman with purpose. She walked into a shared workspace downtown, rented a desk, and logged into her old secure backups. Years ago, she had quietly archived data, not out of suspicion, but professionalism. Now, those files became power. By evening, she had compiled a timeline that could destroy reputations. But she didn't rush. Power, she knew, must be released carefully. Instead of confronting the company, Aisha reached out to someone unexpected, Mr. Adewale, a retired compliance officer known for exposing corporate fraud. They met in a quiet cafe. He listened, didn't interrupt. When she finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. You don't realize what you're holding, he said. This could shake the entire board. Aisha's voice was calm. I don't want revenge, she replied. I want the truth protected. Adewale nodded. Then we move smart. Over the next few days, the city's business world continued as normal, unaware that a storm was forming. Inside Kurbani Group, something strange began happening. An internal audit was announced.
Suddenly. No explanation.
Executives whispered in hallways. Emails were recalled. Files were lost. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Daniel Kobia felt it first. One morning, he was called into a boardroom without warning. Questions were asked, precise questions. Why was this vendor paid twice? Who approved this invoice? Why was Aisha Mensa removed during a compliance review? His confidence cracked, just slightly. Outside the building, Aisha watched from across the street. Not physically, but through the news alerts that began popping up on her phone. Kurbani Group under internal investigation. She didn't smile. This wasn't over. Then came the call. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Aisha, a familiar voice said, forced and polite. This is Mr. Kobia. Silence followed. He cleared his throat. There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding your termination. She let the silence stretch. We would like to discuss the possibility of your return. There it was, the beginning of their desperation. Aisha leaned back in her chair. I'm listening, she said calmly. But inside her chest, her heart thundered. Because she knew something they didn't. The investigation wasn't just internal anymore. And the moment she returned, everything would explode. I did not walk into the building as an employee that morning. I walked in as a woman the company could no longer ignore. The glass doors of Kumbesa Holdings slid open silently, but the tension inside was loud. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. They recognized me.
Of course they did.
Just 3 weeks earlier, I had been escorted out of this same building like a criminal, fired, humiliated, whispered about. Now I was back, not with a resignation letter or a complaint, but with leverage. I wore a simple black suit.
No designer labels. No arrogance.
Just quiet authority. The kind that comes when someone knows something others don't. At the reception desk, the young man who once avoided eye contact now stood up immediately. Good morning, ma'am, he said nervously. They're expecting you. That alone told me everything. I was led to the executive floor, a place I had never been allowed to step into before. As the elevator climbed, my phone vibrated in my hand. A message from Novacore Industries. Proceed carefully. They may attempt to shift blame. I exhaled slowly. That was exactly what they would do. The boardroom doors opened, and I stepped inside. 7 people sat around the long polished table. 7 of the same faces that had watched silently when I was accused. The same mouths that stayed closed when lies were spoken about me. Now, those mouths were tight with fear. The CEO, Mr. Adekunle, stood up immediately. Ms. Zola, he said, forcing a smile, thank you for coming. I did not return the smile. You asked for this meeting, I replied calmly. I am here to listen. He gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. The silence stretched. Finally, the CFO cleared his throat. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, he began carefully. A procedural error. I raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding that destroyed my reputation? I asked. Or a procedural error that cost you a billion-dollar partnership? No one answered. That was when the truth began to crack through the room. Mr. Adekunle sighed and removed his glasses. Novacor has frozen negotiations, he admitted. They cited concerns about our internal ethics and leadership integrity. My heart beat once. Hard. So the pressure was real. You accused the wrong person, I said quietly. And now the consequences have arrived. One of the board members leaned forward. We are prepared to issue a public correction, she said. Clear your name. Restore your image. I finally sat down. Public corrections don't erase public shame, I said. You broadcast my firing. You allowed rumors to grow. You never defended me. The room shifted uncomfortably. Then the CEO spoke the words they had been avoiding. We want you back. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. An offer. In what position? I asked. The CEO hesitated. Director of Compliance, he said. With full authority. I almost laughed. Almost. You fired me without evidence, I replied. You let my name be dragged through the mud. And now, because your survival is at stake, you want to promote me? No one denied it. I leaned back in my chair. You see, I continued, power changes hands very quietly. You don't hear it coming until it's gone. The CFO swallowed hard. What are your conditions? He asked. I had prepared for this moment long before I stepped into the building. First, I said, a public apology. Same platform. Same volume. Same audience. They nodded. Second, I continued, a full internal investigation, led by me, into the fraud you blamed on me. Some faces went pale. And third, I said slowly, anyone found responsible resigns. Immediately. The room went completely still. The CEO looked at the board. They looked at each other. They had no choice. We agree, he said. I stood up. One more thing, I added. My return will be temporary. They stared at me in confusion. I am not coming back to rebuild what you broke, I said. I am coming back to expose the truth. I walked out of the boardroom without waiting for permission. As the elevator doors closed, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Evidence confirmed. Internal sabotage. Multiple executives involved. I closed my eyes. The trap was set. And they had walked straight into it. Because when the truth finally came out, they wouldn't just beg me to return. They would beg me to forgive them. The boardroom had never been this quiet. Not when profits fell. Not when executives resigned. Not even when lawsuits arrived. But this silence was different. It was fear. I stood at the head of the table, dressed simply, no longer an employee, but no longer a victim either. Around me sat the same people who once signed my termination letter with confident hands. Now, those hands were trembling. The company logo glowed behind me on a massive digital screen. Once, it represented my pride. Then, it became the symbol of my humiliation. Today, it meant nothing. The chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Abney, he said carefully, we want you back. I smiled, not with joy, but with understanding. 3 days earlier, the company's biggest client had pulled out. 2 more followed. Their stock price crashed. Investors panicked. The internal audit I had quietly submitted to regulators finally came to light. Everything I warned them about was true. The fraud, the falsified reports, the executive cover-ups, all exposed. The same media houses that broadcast my firing now aired headlines like, Company in crisis after wrongful termination of senior analyst. Whistleblower vindicated as executives face investigation. They didn't say my name at first, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew. The chairman leaned forward. We're prepared to reinstate you, he said, with a promotion, full public apology, compensation. I looked at the faces around the table. The HR director, who smiled while escorting me out. The CFO, who called me emotional. The CEO, who said, "Security, please." I took a slow breath. "You didn't fire me because I was wrong," I said calmly. "You fired me because I refused to stay silent." No one spoke. "You didn't shame me because I broke policy," I continued. "You shamed me because I threatened power." The CEO swallowed hard. "We made mistakes," he said. "We want to fix them." I nodded. "You can't fix betrayal with money," I replied. Then I did something no one expected. I declined. Gasps filled the room. "You see," I said, stepping back, "when you took my badge, you thought you ended my career." I paused. "You freed me." I walked out of that boardroom for the last time, not escorted, not watched, not ashamed. Outside, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. Microphones stretched toward me. "Abony, are you returning to the company? What's your response to the apology? How does it feel to be proven right?" I looked straight into the camera. "I was fired and publicly shamed," I said. "But I was never broken." That clip went viral. Within weeks, I launched my own firm, a compliance and ethics consultancy. Companies called not because they loved me, but because they feared becoming my next case study. Governments invited me to speak. Universities requested lectures. Women wrote me messages late at night saying my story kept them alive. The company that fired me? They survived, barely. 3 executives resigned. 1 was arrested. Their name will forever be tied to one of the most public corporate scandals in the country. As for me, I no longer chase approval. I build systems. I no longer beg for a seat at the table. I build my own. And sometimes late at night, I remember that hallway where they stripped me of my dignity. I smile, because that was the day my real life began.